Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker-Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process in discussions between the authors, narrators, producers, and post-production teams that bring them all together, as well as guests who have listened to the audiobooks and have questions for the creative teams. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. And I'm really excited today to have with me the members of the full cast audiobook Postcards to Hitler, a German Jew's Defiance in a Time of Terror, written by Bruce Neuburger. Of the cast of 9, today we have with us Ken Teutsch, who was the main narrator for the project, Rebecca Stern, Jason Lasky, and Tristan Wright, and myself. So, welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Nice to see you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so let's start off with initially, when the casting call went out and you received that, what attracted you to audition for this project?
What drew me, first of all, as a narrator, nonfiction, history, anything dealing with Jewish history are things that particularly appeal to me and things for which I want to put myself out there. And then the subject matter very much connected for me because it is pretty much the story of half of my family. So anyway, I had to audition.
Yes, thank you. Ken, did you?
Well, I'm also interested in that era of history, and so that made it interesting. And even more was the fact that it was such a personal story and such a just amazing that Mr. Neuburger has access to all of this information and all the documentation and was able to find all the specific information about his family beyond the fact that it's just kind of a fascinating story, a personal story that brings home these sort of historical big picture things to a very personal level. So I also found it very interesting on those levels and was really excited to be chosen to be part of it.
Great. And just joining us, Keith O'Brien, also in the cast.
Hi, guys.
Welcome. Glad you were able to make it. I was just asking what attracted you to audition for this project. And Jason, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think for one thing, it's fascinating to me that, 80, 90 years after the events, that people are still unearthing these kinds of stories and still presenting these kinds of stories to the world. And I do have distant family members who were lost during World War II, who were murdered, in World War II, call it what it is. And so anytime that there's an opportunity for me to get involved with a project that remembers them, right, or remembers members of the family, let's call it, who suffered similar fates, it seems like the honorable thing to do to be involved and to give voice to those who no longer have one. So that was what I guess drove me to audition. And interestingly enough, I didn't realize I had such a great German accent, because when I auditioned, I didn't employ anything of a German accent. I was just speaking like this in the parts that I narrated. So it was interesting when I got chosen and said, okay, you're going to be narrating, 15, 17 characters, all with German accents. Like, okay, here it's a nice creative challenge as well. But yeah, that was the original thing that attracted me to the project.
Yeah, thanks. Keith, did you want to say?
Oh, sure. Well, I love history, and I think this particular period of history is so important that it's just retold again and again, because it seems like in the modern era, we don't seem to learn the lessons of history. So we just, I think it's so important to just continue to tell these stories of the tragedy that happened and how easily it can happen again. I mean, you see the hatred and jealousies, and it just becomes, next thing you know, it's genocide. So for me, it was very Sorry about that.
I can weigh in if
We have a phone camera issues.
phone
Yeah,
in
go
the-
ahead,
between the
Tristan.
seats
Go
in his
for it.
car. I completely agree with Keith, and I think my point was going to be very similar to that, where I found, especially in the first half, 3/4 of the book, it's such a slow burn for these people, and kind of getting a glimpse into their minds as to what they were thinking and how preposterous it all seemed in the beginning. And I mean, I think I'm remembering a scene where they flashed back to one of the kids being young and like seeing Hitler walking down the street. He lived down the block. And I feel like for me, my perspective on the historical, events of this are all basically just dates, images, Schindler's List, and then you kind of jump to the very end, and the lead up to it, I think, is a very important part of for us to see and understand. And I think that was a very personal touch, as opposed to just listing events. It's really through the eyes of these characters. So I found that very appealing to perform, and also I think it's good for people to hear that.
Yeah. And answering my own question, when I first saw the project as a producer, seeing this story and how sort of the leadership of hate grew, and just like you were saying, Tristan, that that it was very personal, but it helped us to see that slow progress, because that is and the very gradual, although it was the pace definitely picked up, but to see how it developed when it was something that if you had jumped right to the end, people would have said, "Oh, no, that's absolutely wrong." And yet there's the propaganda machine doing this thought reform process. And I just feel like, now in our current world where we're hearing these very phrases repeated that are, and the attempt to move us back into, or it's not as if it's, we have fully grown past that. So anyway, it's very important to me as well. During the production, were there any particular moments that stood out to any of you that you found especially meaningful?
Well, what comes to my mind is there were some of those scenes, and we're several people, we're scattered on different continents, and all the technological barriers between the interaction, and yet there were several scenes in that when it was over, everyone just sort of sat there, and you could feel this. That was really rough for everybody getting through some of the scenes, and so I was struck by that. That even with all those barriers, the feeling of it came through, I thought, to the group when we were doing these scenes, because some of the situations you really become involved with these people, and you feel very strongly when you see some of the things that they had to go through.
Yeah, I think I could just add to that. There is some, obviously it's very heavy subject matter, and I think performing it as a cast recording, and for the people watching or listening, we did most of these sessions as the group, as many people that were in the scene during that little part were all together on Zoom. So it's a unique experience as an audiobook narrator, because usually we sit in these little boxes by ourselves and do everything. So being able to actually hear and often see the performances and be able to react off other living people was very novel. And I think that made it even more powerful in the moment to be kind of a part of that. I think it was far more, I don't know if taxing is the right word, but you're more emotionally present, or at least I was, because there was other people, acting with you as opposed to acting against yourself.
Yeah, likewise, just having you here right now, it fully changes the dynamic, because I can imagine what the person's going to do when I'm by myself, but to actually have it being given to me, then the acting, it just, for everybody, it raises up because we have the live moment happening right now. So that's one thing for me. Another thing would be, I think it was actually with that idea, there was a couple of scenes where I remember I was speaking with some of the characters Becky was playing, and I remember like just listening to what you were saying, and then like giving to you, what my character in that moment was feeling, and then that hits you, and then it hits me, and it hits you, and it hits me. Like it was a wonderful ping pong effect. Again, serving the emotional weight of what these real life, what these people were actually experiencing at the time. Obviously, it's fictionalized, and I think that's a credit to the writing too, that it really did get into what the thought process was of these people at the time. And I can only imagine, what was it that they were actually saying? Like how close to it was the writing, in real terms and in reality when this was all actually happening. So,
yeah, Rebecca,
you're muted, Becky. No, you aren't. Okay.
No, I don't think I am. But yeah. Okay.
What everybody has said thus far, really, I 100% agree. What was interesting for me, I was grateful to have the prep time because that was where I got my emotions out. There were a number of times just prepping this that I would have to stop and step out and just let myself cry for a little while. And so I got that out of my system so that I didn't come unglued in any of our actual recording sessions, which would have been inconvenient. But it's the whole idea of it being fictionalized. Yes, it's fictionalized because dialogue has been created that we couldn't possibly, that the writer couldn't possibly have known happened much of the time. However, as long ago as this technically was, what struck me in the family research that I have done, I've read letters. I remember talking to my grandparents who in 1936, my grandfather lived in Breslau, Germany, which is now Wrocław, Poland, which was where the Nazi Party first got its real stronghold, where it got a political toehold in Germany. And my grandfather saw what was going on, went and gathered my grandmother, who was living in Istanbul, Turkey at the time, and they moved to Switzerland for the course of the war. And he spent the next few years trying to convince his family to leave. And I have a lot of the letters from them saying, oh, it'll be fine. Everything's fine. It's just a phase. Things are going to get better. Then they were made to move from their home. You see the change in pictures when they were sent to the ghettos in the smaller towns. And then you see the pictures there and the letters they're sending. I have the last letters they sent before they were sent to Theresienstadt. So yes, the dialogues were fictionalized, but they were very real. And that was one of the things that struck me in this production. Reading these, it gave me insight into my own family's thoughts, like why they would have chosen to stay. And when it quickly got to a point when they thought, maybe, too late. Once you decide that you're finally going to go, there's no way you can. So anyway, that was really powerful for me.
Yeah. And, each of you, less so Ken, but each of you played many different characters throughout the production. And that, of course, has its own challenges. And, we're always trying to establish voices that are distinct. And we were also dealing with trying to land on a light German accent, not too overbearing, although, we wanted some variety in there as well. So what would you say was the most difficult or the most challenging aspect of that? And then how did you navigate that challenge?
Well, being a very scientific and technical-minded person, the way I chose to approach it, aside from just, I only had to play 8 or maybe 9 characters, and so, which was a manageable number, and I could clearly visualize each of these women in my head. Some were stronger personalities, some not so much. There were always descriptions of, that somebody was boisterous and laughing all the time, or somebody who was much more soft-spoken. And so it was relatively easy for me to find the personalities of these women. But then, as far as differing the German accent, there are so many little things you can do, actual technical aspects, whether you turn your W's into more of a V sound, or if you substitute the T's and THs for D's or S's and Z's. And so I would pick a particular aspect, like, okay, this person always puts a D in instead of a T, or this person uses the Z sound instead of a T. So I just got very technical about it, and I made note cards. I have note cards, and I color coded them so that in my script I could color code what each person was, and then I had the matching note cards. So, yeah, I just analyzed the heck out of it.
Yeah, great.
It was also a great period of time too. There was something else is that you might have to do one character when he or she was a teenager, and then later in their 60s, and of course we recorded it all. It was sort of like doing a movie. It was recorded all out of order in what worked for the scheduling, not what worked for personal continuity. So it was
right.
So yeah, you did have to do something like you did with the cards, to try to keep it all straight, or you could really get mauled up by it.
I think they changed names at one point too. The people that moved or got to America changed their first names, so then they're written. And I'm like, wait, which person?
Is this Fritz or Fred or
Fred or Fritz or
right.
Which and how old are they and what time? I mean, yeah. So I use a lot of imagery as well. They're thinking, the size or faces or and kind of the tone of voice. And for me, I had one or two that were sort of mainstay characters, and then I filled in a lot of extras. But I found it also challenging to kind of switch, especially mid-scene, into some of the German officers, where they have to be so brash and kind of picking their accent without making it too comical. I mean, it can be very theatrical, and we didn't want it to sound like the producers. So it was kind of important to change them and make it sound real without it going over the top. So
right. Then of course we had family names that were passed on to the next generation, but not in the same, so more than one Benno. Which Benno is it?
Which Marta? Which there were two or three that
Marta and Berta, common names. And then whether we were pronouncing those names when they were said with the German pronunciation or an American pronunciation. And a lot of complexities around that.
Something that was a little crazy for me was playing so many Nazis, playing, Gestapo officers, or playing a judge, or playing a university lecturer, or all these people who had horrible things to say. And similar to what Rebecca's way of visualizing, that did a lot for helping me, and just trying to take away any. And that was the thing, like, these were human beings. These were also people, right? And these are people who were making very distinct choices about how they were going to go about, living their lives, and determining what was going to be the outcome of all these other people, just, based on their bloodline. So that was challenging from an emotional standpoint, because I know that I was very actively choosing to strip away any kind of empathy that could possibly lie within these people's beings and souls. And the strange thing is that there's a very good chance that these people, they had families of their own, right? And I can imagine, like, the judge going home to his wife and his kid, for example, and saying, "Oh, and how are you today? Oh, what did you do at work today, Daddy?" But that, that's still at the same time, like, that's my approach, but still trying to honor, like, the fact that these people did exist too. And I don't want to talk about, good and evil. I do think there is good and evil in the world, but with these characters, I mean, they weren't one-note characters. These are all very much very fleshed out, three-dimensional people that the writer created. So trying to honor the writing more than anything else. Yeah, that was rough, playing some of these Nazis. Yeah.
Yeah, but no villain thinks he's the villain, right? So,
Right.
So yeah.
If to your point, Jason, of these people have lives and families, and if you haven't yet seen the movie that's out fairly recently, it's in 2024, Zone of Interest. It's oh my goodness, it's about an actual prison camp director, whatever, the top guy at one of the prisons. Yes, and his family lives right outside the concentration camp. And you never go inside the camp. It's the entire film is shot from their family point of view. It's really disturbing, and particularly in its simplicity, that it just, this is normal life for them.
And it landed particularly hard right after doing this project too. Yeah, I saw it right after finishing this up and thought, yeah, okay, I see that now.
Yep, absolutely.
I think I read or heard possibly as part of this production that when some of those people were asked later, years later, 50, 40 years later, how could they physically have done these things? How can they stand there and pull the trigger or load people into train cars and physically get through it? And it was such an interesting psychology where they were saying, like, not only did we think it was okay, we thought it was bad not to. Like they thought it was worse not to do it in that moment, which doesn't excuse it, but it's just an interesting way of kind of getting into that side of it. Just to be like, how could you physically go through with this to be to that level of, manipulated or brainwashed or whatever it would have been, but they felt they were in the right and were going to be punished, or, it was wrong to not. And it's just it's wild to think that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I think it really does come back to that, the leadership and the propaganda, that whole thought reform process. It seems so outrageous that they could have felt that way doing the things that they were doing. And yet it actually relates to another project that we're just wrapping up right now about cults and and there's some really interesting points of intersection. And I'm actually going to have another podcast episode with the authors of these two books because of this interesting point. But people don't go into a cult, for example, knowing that they're going to have their thoughts reformed, knowing that they're going to be sort of brainwashed, is a word that we've come to describe this, into doing things that they would never do prior to that process of sort of being, having our way of thinking changed by somebody who is deliberately manipulating our way of thinking in order to maintain control and gain power.
And dehumanizing another group of people.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to see Leopoldstadt on Broadway when it was there.
My cousin was in that show.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Sarah, who worked for us. Sarah.
I didn't know she was your cousin. I went to see her
because she was in it. Yeah, she's my cousin. Yeah, she took over one of the lead roles as an understudy and then filled in. But yeah, I didn't get to go.
Yeah,
but I read about it.
Yeah, very powerful play. It reminded me when I read this. I was reminded of that project as well. And I did reach out to Tom Stoppard. He said he was, he would have been happy to, I invited him to be interviewed about this, and to work with us on it. But he said he was overloaded and understaffed, under-resourced. Now, let's talk a little bit about full cast projects. I know that some of you have worked on full cast projects before, and I would love to hear just what your experiences have been in terms of differences that you noticed with the way that we approached this project.
I think, like it was said earlier, it's great to feed off of the other actors' narrators. It really helps you get into the scene so much quicker and so much more truthfully. I thought it was fabulous. And I thought it took amazing coordination for you guys to have it all. The logistics of it was great.
Herding cats, lots of cats.
Yeah.
For me, this was my first multicast that I've ever done, and my first live directed type project. And so it was a new thing for me. And I'm also not from an acting background. So I'm from a musical background. So I've had somebody stand on a podium and wave a baton at me and tell me what to do. But this was a very different experience and so rewarding. I loved the experience. I loved seeing how it worked and being so grateful that I am not on the end of having to try to put it together. But yeah, I loved this being an audiobook narrator, voice actor is a pretty lonely profession. We spend a lot of time in a closet by ourselves, and it's so emotionally gratifying to be directly working with other human beings.
Well, it was my first multicast recording too. But for one thing, for me personally, I'm a huge fan of radio drama, and there was a certain feel of doing a radio show that I really enjoyed, because I've done a couple of those with casts. Of course, they were done as a live performance, but there was the feel of doing a radio show, which I certainly enjoyed, without the live sound effects.
Yeah, great.
Thank goodness.
One of the, yeah. Yeah, that would have gotten really complicated. The very first, this is many years ago now, the very first full cast project we tried doing it where I would have the actors send in their lines, and I just felt, it worked kind of, but not nearly as well as, what I really recognized is, okay, we need to be able to be talking to each other, as characters, right? That we can make assumptions about what the way the other person's going to read that line, but then we're kind of locking out the great creative potential that happens in actual interaction. Because when we're actually talking to somebody, we will say things in ways that we don't even anticipate for ourselves. Yeah, I've found that it's not only gets us a better finished product in the end, but oh my gosh, I love being in sessions with other actors and
I loved learning from everyone else, because that was part of it. Is yes, you go in thinking, having an idea in your mind of how a line is going to be read, and then someone does it totally differently and you go, oh, wow. Oh, that's okay. That was fantastic. and so as someone who's relatively new to this business, moments like that are gold to me. I'm soaking it up.
Yeah, God, it's great. Let's just take a short pause and we'll be right back.
Do you have a book that you imagine with multiple voices, or a screenplay or stage play? At Pro Audio Voices, we love working on these more complex productions with music and sound effects and a full cast of voices. Bringing together decades of experience in both theatre and audio production, our team brings your project to life. From manuscript preparation, to casting, to directing the actors, and a post-production team to bring it all together, Pro Audio Voices brings your project to life. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com/full-cast.
What would you say is overall was the most challenging thing for you about the project?
The weight of it, just very simply. There's another story of another group of people who, because of their blood, because of their lineage, because of their belief system, they were targeted for extermination. And that's the thing. This isn't a new story. Going back to what you were saying in the beginning, and right now I'm based in Armenia, which doesn't really pose so many challenges, as far as us getting together and doing this kind of thing. Like, we've worked it out pretty well. The challenges are that I'm living in a country that has gone through, in the last 3 or 4 years, a couple of wars and several skirmishes, where it's very much the same kind of ethnic, on the surface, that's what it appears to be, like the same kind of ethnic cleansing that historically speaking, the Armenian genocide is what is what inspired, for lack of a better word, what was going on with Hitler and in Nazi Germany and the targeting of the Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, the infirm, the elderly, the handicapped, and everybody of those ilks. So for me, that's like another added dimension to all this, that this is stuff that is just, it's not so far away from where I am. And I don't have any Armenian blood in my family, but when I first started learning, when we came to Armenia in 2017, and the students asked me as the theater teacher, hey, can you help us with the memorial show this year? I said, what memorial show? And they said, the Armenian genocide. And I said, what Armenian genocide? And then I got a really big history lesson from a bunch of diaspora and local Armenian students. And then I started seeing some of the images, and then it just took me straight back to, I've been to Israel, and I've been to the big Holocaust museum. I've been to Washington, D.C., and I've seen that Holocaust Memorial Museum. And I see so many images that I've seen before. Just, these happened before everything that I know about in terms of the history that was presented to me during my upbringing in the American education system in New York State. So it's just really jarring in that sense. Like, again, like the weight of this. This is not an old story. This is a current story, and not limited or, to my particular locality.
To play off of what Jason said, play off of doesn't seem appropriate, but to go further than that. Thank you. You said this isn't a new story. Well, it's also not an old story. It's an ongoing story, and that's part of it. I think from my point of view, that was the hardest thing. Yes, I got emotional because of what had happened and because of my personal connection to it, and it doesn't feel like it was that long ago. But also the number of times reading through the script that I would read words and like, I just read that in the news this morning. The relevance, the immediacy, the fact that this is not old news, that this is not something from history. This is the present. It doesn't look the same right now here, but it could. And that, to me, was the hardest part, was knowing that it's happening. It has continually happened. It is happening someplace in the world right now as we speak. And it could easily happen here. And people for decades have said it could never happen here. And this book, to me, there were so many moments that this proved, yes, it could happen here, because it is happening here.
I was really struck by the characters, the people, the Ibers, who were the friends, the non-Jewish friends of Benno and Anna, and how they were so supportive throughout. They didn't turn on them, whereas so many others did. And I think for me, I think back to when I was growing up, and I grew up as a minority white in a predominantly Black neighborhood. And we had a bigot of a bus driver when I was in middle school. And this one experience has stuck with me and really troubled me. There was this one day when, the bus was noisy, and the bigoted, this bus driver was yelling at everybody, and we pull up to the school. She gets the principal on the bus, and she blames all the Black kids. And I was so livid, and yet I didn't have the courage in that moment to stand up and say it wasn't just the Black kids that, and that always bothered me. I felt like, well, why didn't I have the strength to do that in the moment? And to see the Ibers, though they're minor characters in the story, to me, they, just have so much extra warmth and appreciation for them standing up. And
if I understood the story correctly, it was largely due to the Ibers that a lot of this information is even known, because the Neuburgers gave their papers and pictures and things to the Ibers, right, when they were thrown out of their apartment, and said, if you ever get the chance to get these to our children, please do it. And I guess they did, because otherwise we wouldn't know a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, right. Is there something that any or each of you would like to communicate to the potential listeners who might be considering getting the audiobook of Postcards to Hitler?
Well, I would say one thing is that there's been a lot of dramatization and stories and of this period, and I think other people have made this point that this isn't just a Holocaust story. This isn't just this isn't really even mostly about the camps or how it ended. It's really a lot of details about what life was like as the heat got higher and higher and higher, and the little indignities and the little coping mechanisms that people had to generate. So there's a lot of low level detail in what life was like in that regime that you don't usually get in some of the big dramatizations of this period. So I found a lot of that really fascinating, and a lot of psychological insight into what it was like to be under this kind of pressure and have really nothing to feel helpless. That's what it all boiled down to with the story of Benno and these postcards, which are the title of the book is, what did he accomplish with it? Well, he felt like he had to do something, and that's all that he could do. And so I think a lot of that granular detail of what life was like in Germany before World War II and is very interesting, and that might be something that people haven't heard, and would make this be another reason to want to listen to this audiobook.
The fact that it starts with Benno and Anna meeting in 1907, and then you go all the way through from there, so you do get to see that buildup, a little bit of what life was like, which was much, much better, of course, than it became in the 1930s. But still, there were microaggressions, to use a current term, that people were tolerating because they wanted to blend in, and didn't help.
Yeah. There are definite lessons to be learned, I feel, like in listening to this book, that we can apply to today, without a doubt. Just the fact of going along with what seems to be the majority rule, it just sort of being silent. Sometimes the courage that it took to write those postcards. I mean, even he might think it was so small, but it took tremendous courage to do that. And it's if more people had that kind of courage, perhaps we could change the world.
I would say it's going to be entertaining as well. I think that as we're discussing this, it's all serious and it's like something you should listen to, or you want to. But I think that because of the format and because of all of the post-production work and all of the cast recording, that it's going to be a very engaging book to enjoy, albeit dark. But I think that it will be something that people will have a good experience listening to.
I think it's a good thing to try to with for example, history curricula in middle schools and high schools, like everybody. Well, okay, in where I went to school, we were reading Anne Frank, or we were reading the dramatized version of it in our big, huge English textbooks back in the day. I think this is something that it could potentially be something for students to listen to, because if you want to change the world, you got to start with the young minds, and you have to have faculty who are willing to go to those places and say, look, you need to learn from the past, because if we don't want to keep, it's great to have these stories available. It's horrible to have these stories available. And so if we don't want to continue having horrible stories available, we got to listen to the horrible stories so we don't, keep fumbling about and making the same kind of errors that are the powers that be, shall we say, continue to create around the world. So I think this would be a great companion to whatever World War II curricula are being taught in not only American schools. This is a worldwide problem. So this is something worth perhaps pitching to, bigger educational associations. Like, maybe this is something that you should listen to, and here's the reason why. And just turn on the nightly news or the international news. And this is all the reasons you need to teach this kind of story to younger people.
Yeah. Let's, listen to the stories so we don't keep recreating the stories of pain. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you all for being with me during this time, as well as for working on this production with us. It's been very rewarding, and I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Honor working with all of you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolute delightful.
Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.